I was always very close to my grandmother. My mother died when I was very young, so my gran was pretty much the only mother figure I had in my life. She was the sweetest, gentlest person you'd ever meet, almost to a fault. You know, that wouldn't hurt a fly type. Well, it seems that I was always my gram's protector. I had to be. She was just too damn nice. I think that's why when she was diagnosed with Alzheimer's, I became even more responsible for her. The more I learned about this horrible disease and how it was going to take my gram from me, the more I wanted to protect her. I was going to have to make her decisions for her. I must have researched and interviewed about 100 nursing homes. Looking back, I must have been one of those crazy caregivers the nurses hate to see coming. I couldn't help it. This was the most important person in my life, and I was losing her before she was even born. See, that's the weird thing about this disease. You start the grieving process while they're still sitting right there in front of you. Her body was fine, but her mind quickly deteriorated. I'll never forget the day. I walked into her room, and she said, "Who are you? Are you the janitor?" Now, I don't cry easily, but I had to leave the room for a couple minutes. My grandmother's body was sitting right there, but the gram I knew was gone. As the disease progressed, she spoke less and less. I initially balked when the staff at the nursing home suggested I bring in the volunteers of Andrewscoggin Home Care and Hospice to sit with my grandmother. First of all, they're volunteers. What the heck do they know, right? Second, this forget-me-not program thing, I gotta be honest, it sounded kind of dumb. They had these games of puzzles and crafts and things that are supposed to help people with diseases like this. I guess it helps their minds. And they also suggested that the socialization would be good for my gram. So, whatever, I said sure. And the volunteers started coming in and sitting with my gram, and I have to admit, I was pretty impressed by how great they were with her. They just walked right in and started talking with her, even when my gram was too confused and often didn't even respond to them. There was just one volunteer. She brought in one of those little sewing toys. You know the kind with shoelaces and weave in and out, the little kid's toy? My gram saw that, and her eyes lit up, and she shakily reached her hand out for the toy. That caregiver was so tender and gentle, helping my gram get set up with that little toy, even helping my gram when her efforts to weave got stuck. They just sat there for a while, the volunteer softly singing to herself, and all of a sudden, my gram says, "I used to sew with my mother." I hadn't heard her say more than 2 words in all these months. When she came out with a complete sentence, I was completely blown away. She was so important to me, and all I could do was sit there and stare at her, my mouth hanging open, my eyes as big as saucers, staring at her. But that volunteer did not miss a beat. She said, "Oh, really? Me too." And she started chatting with my gram about needle pointing and crocheting. And it hit me, right then and there. I had become numb to my grandmother's disease. I'd stopped seeing her for who she was. That volunteer helped me see my grandmother as my grandma again. For that, I will always be grateful.
I'll always be grateful for the care that my husband received at the end of his life. You're not supposed to lose your spouse at a young age. That's just not in the plans. You marry him, you promise them the rest of your life. You envision retiring and traveling the world and growing old. All those dreams came shattering down the day I was diagnosed with a terminal illness. I was in denial for a really long time. This is something that happens to other was the day my husband was admitted to the hospice house. His symptoms had become more than the nurses and I could handle at home. I was really reluctant to leave our house, the home we had built together, but I knew that was what was best for him. I can't begin to tell you how relieved I felt when I finally saw the place for myself. It was like a home, warm and inviting. We were there only a couple days when one morning my husband turned to me and said, "Can I ask you a question?" "Sure," I said. "Marry me." I just laughed and looked at him. He was smiling, but serious. "I want to marry you all over again," he said. Well, didn't the nurses and staff at the hospice house think that was the most romantic thing they had ever heard? So, within a couple of days, with help from family and friends and the staff at the hospice house, we pulled it off. On a warm spring day in June, I married my husband again. We dressed him in a Sunday best, and I wore a white linen dress that I found at the thrift shop. We got our minister to perform the ceremony, and all our closest family and friends were there. There were flowers and a photographer, and even a cake donated by a local baker. Later that evening, after all our family and friends had gone away, I brought out my surprise, an Elvis CD. It included the song that we first danced to at our first wedding. My husband couldn't dance with me this time, so I crawled in bed beside him, still in my white dress, and we lay there listening to the music.
Wise men say, only fools rush in, but I can't help falling in love with you. Shall I stay? Would it be a sin? But I can't help falling in love with you.
I can never express how much those special memories meant to me and how much I appreciate all that the house, that the staff did to make that a reality. I will cherish those memories forever. I just want
I
you to
just
know.
wanted you to know all your options. The social worker was almost pleading with me, but I wasn't ready to talk about hospice house. No, was all I could get out. That's where people go to die. That means we've given up on her. Slowly but surely, they helped me to understand the hospice house isn't where you go to die. It's where we could make her more comfortable. She was in so much pain, and it was getting more and more difficult to control it at home. I felt helpless. My mother sacrificed everything for us. She was my rock. She was my whole world, and there was nothing I could do to stop her suffering. It was a horrible feeling. I feel guilty now for not being more open-minded about the house, because what a difference they knew how to make her more comfortable. Oh, to see her muscles finally relax, for her to set her head against a pillow, her smile to return, such a blessing. I don't know what I was expecting, really. Cold rooms, harsh lighting, stiff sheets, I guess. But when we walked through the front door, do you want to know the first thing I noticed? Cookies. Fresh baked cookies. I am not kidding you. The whole place was warm and welcoming and looked and smelled like home. It was like a giant weight lifted from my shoulders. My mother wasn't able to go home. She was declining, but at least she was at peace and she was comfortable. The staff at the hospice house kept us up to speed with her plan of care. The doctor told us what was happening and what was going to happen in a compassionate, yet to the point kind of way. And that was a relief. Let me tell you, at this stage of the game, the last thing you want to hear is the sugar-coated half-truth. He told us about delirium, the state of sudden confusion that people sometimes experience at the end of life. They said they would not let my mother experience delirium. You can imagine my outrage when she called to tell me She went outside to play in the snow this morning. My jaw hit the floor. Oh, she sounded like a little girl on Christmas morning. They went out to play in the snow. Then she came inside to warm herself by the fire, and it was romantic. Oh, I shoved on my boots. I threw on my hat and coat. I was out the door in 10 minutes. The doctor was going to get a piece of my mind. They told me they wouldn't let my mother experience delirium. Clearly, she was. When I came bursting through the door, explaining what my mother had imagined to the doctor, he just looked at me, half smiling, and said she did. I said, I'm sorry, what? He said, she did go out and play in the snow. I just stared at him. He said, when she saw the white fluffy flakes outside her window, she told the nurses and the CNAs her wish to go outside to see the snow. So they did. They took time from their busy schedule to bundle my mother up in a wheelchair just so she could go play in the snow one more time. To show that kind of kindness and compassion, I
Just can't put words to it. My daughter wasn't even 30 years old yet. But the doctor just spoke the word I feared most. Cancer. She was the mother of 2 little ones. Still a baby herself in my eyes. For 3.5 years, my daughter put up the most courageous fight I'd ever witnessed. She was an absolute warrior. The epitome of a supermom. But it was in 2012 when we found ourselves once again in the emergency room. She was doubled over in horrific pain, and I was helpless to make it stop. A few days later, the doctors told us there was nothing more we could do and suggested we look into hospice house. Those words and the look in my daughter's eyes will haunt me forever. She had fought so hard. She never once had given up the hope that she might beat the cancer and live to see her children grow up. Anyway, she decided to move forward with hospice in the hopes of getting some relief from her pain. The whole time plans were being made, I was screaming inside, no! Hospice house is a place of death. I don't want my daughter around all those dying people. What if she gave up the fight? Still, I never voiced my fears. My job as her father was simply to be there, to comfort and give strength. When we arrived at hospice house, they gave us a tour of the facility, and I quickly learned just how wrong I had been. The first thing I noticed was the sound, or lack thereof. It was so quiet. Not deafeningly so, just peaceful. I guess I had grown accustomed to all the beeping machines and ringing telephones and nursing stations chatter and buzzing alarms. And everyone at hospice house, the staff and the volunteers, looked us right in the eye and greeted us with a warm smile. Even in our moments of extreme grief, they never shied away. Instead of feeling that I had to hide my pain for the sake of others' comfort, no, it was my family and me who were being comforted. The doctor was very honest with us as her time drew near. I'll never forget the look in his eyes when he told us he didn't think it would be much longer. What I saw in his eyes was sincere kindness and empathy. I had to leave my daughter's little room so she wouldn't see my tears. I took a walk down the reflection trail just to let it all out. There were no sounds of traffic, just nature and life continuing as my daughter's was ending. That night I lay on the couch watching my baby sleep, something I'd done 1,000,000 times since the day she was born. But in my heart I knew that this night would be the last. As I lay there watching her, I heard this most beautiful music coming from down the hall. and then this voice singing. It sounded like an angel. I was overwhelmed with a feeling of gratefulness. I couldn't control what was happening to my child, but I was so incredibly thankful that my daughter was here, in this place, hearing these sounds as she made peace with her death. The next morning, with the most peaceful look on her face, my daughter passed away. There was no pain, no beeping, no alarms, no fear. I still feel it with me every day. There are thousands of moments, from that very first time I held her in my arms, to that last beautiful look on her face, that are the memories that I will cherish forever.
Soccer games, piano concerts, days at the lake fishing, Boy Scout merit badge ceremonies. Why? Because my grandfather was at every one. My grandpa was an amazing man. He was a World War II veteran and served in the United States Army. My grandpa didn't like to talk about his time in the service much, but us grandkids asked a lot of questions over the years, so he opened up to us a little bit more. We used to go into his closet and look through his things to find his old uniforms and medals. My mom had a picture on her desk at work of my grandfather and I, and me in his garrison cap, and both of us beaming with pride. My grandpa taught me so much about life and love, being compassionate and strong, courageous and honorable. I always had him to look up to. It was really hard for me as my grandfather got older and his health deteriorated. Choosing a nursing home was the most difficult thing to do, but we found this wonderful place where the staff was great and he was happy there. I think he was just happy to get everyone out of his hair for a while and have a little peace and quiet. Even when his health failed him, his mind stayed so sharp. Up until the end, he was as quick as a whip. It got to a point where the doctors said that we should look into hospice services. Not only did Androscoggin Home Care and Hospice send over clinical staff to help my grandfather and my family, but they sent over volunteers too. And when they learned that he had served in the military, they set him up with a veteran volunteer. It's called the Veteran to Veteran program. These visits were like the light in my grandfather's day. He enjoyed them so much. He would always talk about his new friend nonstop, though he was a Navy vet and my grandpa was an Army guy, so they used to give each other a hard time and joke around a lot. It's as if Androscoggin had given him something that he could connect to that we as a family couldn't. His time in the service shaped so much of who he was as a man. It was awesome to see that spark in his eye as he talked with his vet volunteer. And that volunteer showed up like clockwork for my grandfather. Even when his health failed him and his end came near. Even when he stopped talking and he would just lie there in bed and listen. That volunteer would come and have a one-sided conversation, but you could see the joy that it brought him. One night, my family and I gathered in his room for a pinning ceremony. It was a gesture, a token of thanks from the agency for his time of service. This man that had only met my grandfather weeks before had the most heartfelt words of gratitude and respect for my grandfather. He handed my family certificate and pinned on my grandfather's old worn-out cotton t-shirt a small American flag. To conclude the ceremony, he stood at attention at my foot of my grandfather's bed and said, "Thank you for your time of service," and saluted him. That's when my grandfather shakily rose his hand to his brow and returned the salute. My family cried, sad tears and happy ones. I'm never going to forget that moment.
Being told you have an expiration date on your life is a feeling I just can't explain. Thankfully, I'm in a much better place now than I was 2 years ago. I fought through the pain, shock, denial, anger over my circumstances, and have come to be at peace with my illness. I've decided I'm going to live every moment of every day, for as many days as I have left. And hospice helps me do that. It's more than just the medical stuff, though. The hospice cares for me as a whole person. No longer do I feel like the embodiment of my illness, something to be fought and monitored and controlled. Now I feel like a person who's being cared for physically, mentally, spiritually. This whole person care has really helped me come to this place and be at peace with my illness. And has really changed my whole outlook on my life. Suddenly the smallest things, like listening to the birds in the morning or hearing the kids laughing and playing on their way home from school in the afternoon, bring so much joy. Hospice is kind of a dirty word, though, isn't it? I mean, people hear hospice and think death. I wish I could help them understand, though, that for me, it's just the opposite. For me, hospice gives life. The care the hospice staff gives me helps me to control my symptoms and allows me to continue to be able to live my life. Ever since I was a little girl, I always wanted to go to New York City, see the bright lights, Times Square, maybe see a Broadway show. And you know what I did last month? I went to New York City. The hospice staff and volunteers that helped make that possible. I spend more time with friends now. I don't get so caught up in the silly little things. Hospice has taken away so much of my fear. Not all of it, but much of it. I know my team is going to be there for me. Just last week I started to spike a fever, and the nurse was out at my house within hours. You know, she stopped in again on her way home from work that night just to make sure I was okay. I can't tell you what a relief it is to know that I have people like that looking out for me. So I hope that you'll remember me. Remember my story and the stories of people like me. Because being able to leave this world in peace and comfort and dignity is something that every person deserves. Knowing that the hospice staff and volunteers are there for me and my family is like having an extra layer of support, extra arms holding me up, helping